Everyone has the right to education, so says the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26. On some level, everyone understands the value of compulsory education, but what purpose does it serve to those who it leaves behind? Do you feel that standardized tests assess your academic knowledge and abilities?
Yeah, in part I think they do, but for people like me, they don't, because I can study for tests and I can know all about the content, but the idea of test taking gets me really nervous and pressured, and when I'm nervous and pressured, I tend to forget everything, so then I fail the test.
I would say with the standardized tests I took that I don't do so great on, but I know what I'm talking about. I know what the subject is and the material of it, but it doesn't really show what you know.
Do you feel that standardized tests assess your academic knowledge and abilities?
To a certain extent, yeah. I think that in terms of knowledge, yes, they do. In terms of abilities, no, they don't. I think that it's something that you should be able to do, and to say that a lot of people are like standardized tests don't reflect me well, and I can understand that, but it's also something that I think is an important skill just as much as being able to write an essay or anything. You need to be able to take a test. But when you have schools like IHS who base their grades based on standardized tests, and and that's something like 50% of the grades I don't even know, and not so much on the other work that's provided, that's when I don't like it. I think that testing is a component of schooling that needs to be there though, so to say to wipe it all out, I think is kind of ridiculous. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think that it's a different way of testing someone, and there's so many different things that you could do. That's just one thing.
I feel that standardized testing really limits the person who's looking at who I am to see what I do and the kinds of things I do. Let's say a kid is very artistic or creative, it doesn't show much of that in a standardized test. Besides, in a standardized testing, it's not about how you do in the specific subject area, it's about how well you do on the standardized testing. So you may be very good at standardized testing, but you might not be particularly good at the subject that you're taking the standardized testing for.
Do you feel that standardized tests adequately assess your academic knowledge and abilities?
No, not at all. Not at all. Like, it's really just like, hey, did you memorize this? Or like, hey, do you know the form for this essay? Like, it's really stupid to me.
They make me cry. Honestly, I cried when I had to do one, and I started crying. They make me very anxious, although, like, I don't do badly on them, just like sitting there, and then like I always sit there and I'm like, and then I look at that and I'm like, they're on the next page. Ah!
I mean, I've always done really well in the ELAs without putting anything into them. It's not a good measure of either effort or knowledge, really, I don't think. My mom, when she was in college, I forgot the name of the exam. She was at university in England, and she was going to take a test that would let her go to Oxford, and she was a really successful student, and she got to this test, and she'd studied and everything, and prepared herself, and she had a complete nervous breakdown, a panic attack right there. She couldn't take the test and failed, and that pretty much ruined part of her life. So I don't know. I don't have a very positive view of standardized tests.
Throughout New York State, just about everyone in the public education system will have heard of the Regents exams. The Board of Regents supervises the majority of New York's educational activities, with purview over the university and the New York State Education Department. The following is the Board of Regents' vision statement. The Board of Regents envisions a New York in which all people are prepared for citizenship, work, and continued learning throughout their lives. We foresee a New York in which gaps in achievement have closed, and the overall level of knowledge and skill among the people matches or exceeds the best in the world. However, not everyone is satisfied with the Regents standard. Individuals of different learning styles often feel left behind by these assessments, and they, of course, also need to be provided for. The Lehman Alternative Community School is one example of a school moving its teaching off of Regents.
The Lehman Alternative Community School, or LACS, is a small public middle and high school in Ithaca, New York that was founded in 1974 by Dr. Dave Lehman. LACS is alternative in many ways, including the fact that it does not administer the New York State Regents tests. Instead, its graduation requirements are based on a system called Graduation by Exhibition, or GBE. The GBE requires LACS students to create portfolios demonstrating proficiency in each of 7 essential areas: community participants and leaders, meaning community service and career exploration; communicators, including English, math, computer literacy, and foreign language; critical thinkers, which includes anti-bias and conflict resolution; designers, producers, and performers, including music, theater, or visual arts; researchers, which means social studies and participation in LACS's democratic student government; sustainers of the natural environment, meaning science; and healthy persons, which includes physical education and health.
Well, portfolio is a record of work that I've done in the past, so it definitely shows who I am and what I've done in these classes, instead of just showing the grades I've gotten for these assignments.
I like the portfolio system. I think that it makes sense to have your own time frame within which you can create something and definitely be creative about your work.
$5 and I'll just say it's taking, all different components of your learning and putting it together. So I think it assesses your abilities better, and at the same time it also acknowledges your knowledge of things that you've learned in the class.
Okay, there's not really a way you can assess knowledge in a accurate and, individual way. I think it's really, really hard to do that. I don't think there's any really particular, I think that it has to be separate for each person. It can't just be like, well, this works for alternative people. Like, it doesn't really work like that. It kind of has to be kind of separate for everyone, which is really hard. I feel really bad for the schools because you can't really do that to, we are such a small student body that, I still feel like not everybody gets assessed the way that they feel that they should be. But I feel like portfolios they're interesting, and I think they really show, like, how you think, but I don't know if they so much assess it.
Portfolios, I think they're a good idea because it's obviously what you've done instead of some person's expectations of what you should have learned or maybe outdated knowledge that you should have learned.
The following is the voice of Dr. Dave Lehman. He founded the Lehman Alternative Community School, which has waivers from most Regents tests.
Regents exams were optional. And I don't know if you know that, historically in the state of New York, that was the case. The Regents exams, and matter of fact, Ithaca high school students, for many, many years, not everybody took Regents exams. And it was primarily those who, because there was an era where scores on Regents exams would help qualify you for a scholarship to a state college or university. So there was something of an incentive for people to take a Regents exam and to do well on them. But actually, much less than the majority, much less than 50%. I think it was probably more like a quarter to maybe a third of Ithaca high school students for years would take Regents exams. So we kind of did the same thing. The Regents exams were optional because it was, the credits that you earned by which you graduated from high school. And we did institute things like when the semester of participation in government came in as a new high school requirement in the state of New York, we approached that through our school governance committees, family groups, all school meetings, quarter meetings, things of that sort, because we felt that's getting at the exact kind of thing that New York State Department was talking about as far as participation in government. What more concrete, real way than actually participating in governing your own school? The whole idea was to do that, to reevaluate and revise our curriculum. And subcommittees were created in all the academic areas that involved students, staff, parent, caregivers, sometimes community people. And for a chunk of time, I want to say the bulk of the year, committees met, reports were made. They really worked on doing surveys and interviewing people and talking with students and staff, trying to really take a good hard look at what we're doing and how can we make it a genuinely alternative out of that, one of the major decisions to essentially no longer give Regents exams. Now, their students couldn't request that as a sort of, would arrange for them to take it at Ithaca High School or something, but that would no longer be our focus. We had also begun to get involved with the Coalition of Essential Schools, and part of that whole involvement was to look at graduation by exhibition. So now we're back at ACS saying, okay, so we're not going to give the Regents exams. What are we going to do? How do we start moving in the direction of graduation by exhibition? That's where the whole idea of portfolios, of exhibitions, demonstrations, so that we were also saying, look, as a coalition school, we ought to be really moving in that direction anyway, so let's go for it. Commissioner Tom Sobel, who was the Commissioner of Education at the time, working with his deputy commissioner, said, in connection with the new Compact for Learning, that document was really setting a, as it sort of implies, a new compact, a new direction for education in the state of New York. And he wanted to highlight schools that were already exemplars, moving in the direction of what the new compact was all about, and looked to and saw the 14 coalition schools as great exemplars of what the compact should be about. So, working with the Board of Regents, identified that we would be the first compact partnership schools. It was a big deal. We actually had a team of us who went to Albany and appeared before the Board of Regents. There was somebody from each of these 14 schools who made a presentation, staff, students, myself, and we made this presentation. It was a big deal. And they went through several drafts, and we tried to work backwards. So if you meet an ACS graduate a year or two after they've graduated on the street, what would be the skills, knowledge, and attitude that you would hope they would possess as a young citizen in the 21st century? The idea was to divorce it from the notion of seat time, that you just got to put in your time in a given class, whether it's a semester course or a year-long course, and if you pass the course, then you get your credit, and you're on your way to graduation. No, it was saying what we would want to work with students in doing is the ability to demonstrate these 7 essentials, and there might be more than one way to do that. We'll provide courses and projects and other ways that you can work on that, because most people might find that helpful. Yeah, we'll do that. It's a part of our responsibility. But we also would be open to these other ways that it might be done. So it was clearly, from the very beginning, to get away from credit, to get away from letter grades. We never did letter grades from the very beginning. It's always been written evaluations. Late 80s, maybe early 90s, when there was a new assistant superintendent who did not particularly look favorably upon ACS and was looking at different ways to, I think, essentially see what she could do to get rid of us. So that's, for example, when middle school students lost the open campus privilege. That's just an example of the kind of pressure we were under. It also brought in the State Department of Education to do a total review of our whole high school program to see if it was meeting state ed requirements. Under that kind of pressure, rather than constantly feel on the defense, I went to the all-school meeting. I went to the staff and said, look, guys, I need some help here. This is getting too weird. Let's do something to sort of take some control of this ourselves. Richard Mills became Commissioner of Education. This is now into the, say, mid-90s. And how the Commissioner had set that up is he had created a committee, this sort of blue ribbon committee of well-known educators, actually from around the country, about a dozen people, if I remember, who would serve as a committee to review alternatives to the group of the set of taking Regents exams. But what initially was to address was there were really only two, whether taking SATs or advanced placement through what's called the International Baccalaureate. That committee had really been set up to look at other kind of standardized tests and see where they could substitute. That's not what we wanted to do as the coalition schools in the state of New York. Coalition, members of the Coalition of Central Schools. Well, there was now a group of 20-some of us. I want to say maybe 26, more or less. And the way the commissioner had set up what you could submit to this alternative review committee was an individual high school could not submit a plan. A school district could not submit a plan. It had to be some kind of bigger, overarching agency like Educational Testing Service that does, the SATs or the International Baccalaureate people. So that's when we formed the New York Performance-Based Consortium. 20-some coalition schools who said, we're going to do graduation by exhibition. We want to do Regents exams. And presented, developed a really well-documented, well-put-together, here's what the consortium schools will do in line with our graduation by exhibition, and seek approval from the State Ed Department from this alternative review committee to be able to do that. Interestingly enough, back to the commission. Now, this is a committee that the commissioner himself put together. The committee comes back and says, this is worth looking into. We should work with these people to see if we can't develop this as another approach. And remember, now this is a collection of some 20 more or less schools. So it's not a single school, it's not a district, so it met that requirement. The commissioner comes back and overturns his committee's ruling and says that this did not demonstrate how one-for-one a given test could replace a Regents exam, because it had been written much more globally and holistically. It's not like we're saying, okay, we have a particular exam that we would give all of our 26 schools in biology, for example. As you know, it wasn't designed around that. It was designed around portfolios that are much beyond just a particular exam of 2 or 3 hours on some Monday afternoon somewhere in June. Commissioner says, no, I won't accept the committee's thing on it because they have not demonstrated what I wanted to see. We were totally incensed and hired a lawyer. Actually worked pro bono. I mean, we didn't have to pay them. Some of them were involved with some of the schools in New York City anyway, and developed an incredible collection. It was like a box full. I have the box in the archives of this legal brief with all kind of testimony from nationally known educators, various universities, from the schools. I wrote a whole piece for it. Three-judge court, supposedly, to make this decision, and the decision comes back in favor of the commissioner. In the background, we had also begun politicking with members of the Board of Regents, as well as with state legislators, and sort of in the background saying, look, if this thing doesn't succeed as a legal case, maybe we can put pressure on the legislature to create a bill which would grant us the option to carry this on. And so we just shifted a focus away from the lawsuit, which we were hugely disappointed. We really started then shifting the whole focus to working on the state legislators, and started getting some bills actually drafted that started to appear in the House and Senate, and began putting so much pressure in the background on the commissioner that the 5-year waiver was given. We were waived from having to take the Regents exams, and during that 5-year period would gather additional data to present and argue our case for being able to do this beyond the 5-year waiver. Began working hard on that, and went and made a huge presentation as a consortium to the Board of Regents, to the Commissioner of the Board of Regents, and didn't carry the day. Again, Commissioner, it's like I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care what the Board of Regents says. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm not going to accept that. And the commissioner actually came and visited ACS. He was in Ithaca with his deputy commissioner, and we're in an evening town meeting, and a number of our parents and people who came and spoke very eloquently, community members, parents, students. There's a big part of that whole meeting. And the commissioner came over and spent the better part of the morning. I took him around, visiting various classes. He loved it. He thought we were doing a great job. Really, and I think I was pretty sincere. And he said, more of our high schools ought to be doing this kind of work. He was genuinely impressed. However, as he left, he said, and they ought to be able to take Regents exams and probably do quite well. We were sort of dumbfounded. Where do you come off with that kind of reasoning, Well, that was both a tremendous positive thing to hear, but also a real downer, that was sort of the way he was approaching it. You guys are doing great stuff. You'll be able to do well on the Regents exams, don't worry about it. So then we, again, started putting more pressure on the state legislature to create bills that would give us that, and eventually that pressure on the commissioner and the state ed, we came within a whisker of actually getting that legislation voted on, and sort of at the last minute, the waiver was extended. And that's where we are at present. And I think we're now in, the second or third year of the current extended waiver, during which the agreement for this waiver was that we would continue giving the ELA. The reason the consortium accepted that, one, we felt we had to, either we make some compromise or we give up the whole thing. And the reason we thought that one we could go with is if it's not heavily content driven, you don't have to know all of these authors and what they wrote, and you don't have to know a definition of onomatopoeia in poetry writing or whatever it is. It's much more a skill-driven kind of test. You read this stuff and then you write a short essay about it. So that was our sort of compromise to be able to get this extension, during which the expectation is that we would again present evidence of the power of our graduation by exhibition.
LACS is by no means the only school that has developed a form of assessment other than the Regents exams. The Performance-Based Standards Consortium, a consortium of 28 schools in New York State, which LACS is a part of, have all developed alternatives to the Regents exams through which they assess their students. An example of one of these alternatives is the system used by the James Baldwin School in New York City. The James Baldwin School uses a system known as the PBATS, or Performance-Based Assessment Tasks. Unlike LACS, where students receive narrative evaluations as an alternative to grades and a GPA, the James Baldwin School does give their students grades through a system of numbers between 55 and 100. The PBAT assessment includes a 5 to 7 page paper culminating in a 45-minute long public presentation to a group of 3 adults, a member of the Regents Board, a James Baldwin School teacher, and a third party. James Baldwin is unique because each of its students has transferred from a more traditional school. The students prefer PBATs to Regents exams and feel as though the PBATs are a more difficult form of assessment and that they push them to do their personal best. Preparing a culminating paper allows students to bring together all that they have learned in a particular subject, helping them to be more prepared for the college environment. The public presentation aspect of the PBATs helps the students gain self-confidence and teaches them to think on their feet, again helping them to prepare for the college environment. The following is a series of interviews from various teachers and administrators from the James Baldwin School.
I was in elementary school, a 5th grade teacher for 3 years in a really traditional setting, and then a middle school teacher for 3 years in a really traditional setting before I came here. So I wasn't teaching high school students. I wasn't teaching Regents-based classes, but I've been a social studies teacher throughout, and so 5th grade and 8th grade are both testing years for that. So and the tests are actually pretty similar to the high school Regents. It's just a lighter version. So I had plenty of experience teaching students through those tests, and I've always personally resisted that, and I guess there was some privilege in that the history tests weren't as scrutinized or as weighted as like the ELA and math tests in the younger grades. So I didn't have somebody beating on my door all the time telling me what are you doing to prepare these kids and for the history test, and but it was something that was there. But I was able to I think over time, work hard to just do what I felt was good pedagogy and hope that students did well on these things. And so that was a perspective I had even within a more traditional school. But after, I was happy at the school where I was for the most part, but I felt like I was struggling without having a community around me of other teachers that also were critical of these things and that were looking deeply at ways to free up curriculum and pedagogical practices. And so that's what led me to leave and come here.
What brought me here is like Rob, I grew up in New York City and I did the whole Regents thing, and then I went to college and I didn't know how to write a paper. And that was a really frustrating experience for me because I've always done well in school, and then to not know how to write a paper was challenging, and it like set you back. So, and I feel that one of the things that the consortium, that's the organization that has helped us get the waiver, found in their studies of college students is that professors regularly say that students who grew up in New York City public schools don't know how to write papers, and because of that they don't do well in their classes, and then they feel like college is not a place for them, and then they drop out. So I think that one of the things that we do with the performance-based assessments is teach them how to do work in college, because in college, you're not gonna have to do a book report. There's no summary. There's no, when they ask to write a paper, they want evidence, and they want an original thesis, and they want an analysis of that evidence, and that's what the PDAT assesses, their ability to do that. So for me, I found that much more meaningful than teaching to a test. There was no way I was coming back to New York to be a history teacher because the global history Regents is boring. I don't want to teach about, Tutankhamun and ancient Greece and stuff. I don't find that stuff interesting. So I think that what it does is it not only gives teachers the freedom to be able to teach creatively and teach things that make them passionate, but it also allows students to be able to prepare themselves. Because I think that one of the things is teachers are kind of like the scapegoat of education. Everyone's like, well, it's the teacher's fault, the teachers aren't teaching the kids. So, and that's why I feel like there are state tests, because they're like a check on the awful teacher who, doesn't really do anything in life because they have summers off, and they only work from 8 until 2:30, and their lives are peachy, so they don't really put in any hard work. So we're gonna have a test to make sure that you're actually doing something with the kids. But the test doesn't test anything because the students don't pass the test, even if you do straight test prep. And then you're not having fun because all you're doing is making sure that kids can bubble at answers, and the kids aren't having fun because all they're doing is bubbling at answers. So I feel like this is a more respectful way to approach teaching, because it's saying, oh, I have some trust in you as an educator to be able to lead young people into a scholarly habit of being.
So I remember when I was in high school, the sort of national mantra was about the kid that graduates from high school but can't read. That was the big story that was constantly being put out there, especially about urban districts. So we need the standardized test to make sure that we don't have this inequity in education where there's kids that are going to one school and graduating with the same diploma and barely being able to read, and the kids across the other school who are graduating across the same district who are graduating from a different school and being prepared to be successful in college. And so there are some good reasons for there to be accountability on behalf of schools and teachers and students as well. But what's been ignored through all that is that there's real inequities in funding and just about everything else when it comes to schools, and that's not still really being treated as part of the national debate. Nothing has changed in the new administration's sort of mantra about schools and the achievement gap, and shutting down schools is an alternative to making sure that schools have what they need to prepare students. And so there's some reasons why there needs to be a high bar set for students, and that because we want students to be able to graduate with having actually learned something important. And these assessments to me might provide like the first real alternative to these standardized tests to really show that there's important learning going on and that students are prepared to move forward without using these tools which don't really measure anything and that are damaging and dumb down the curriculum and create all sort of problems rippling down. But the struggle that we face is that that's a whole lot of work to make these things happen. We work a lot harder here, I think, to make these presentations happen. Students work a lot harder. The measuring of them requires this whole infrastructure of bringing in people to be the outside evaluators. Administering a Regents test is really easy to do. And grading them, while I hate doing it, is also a lot easier than like helping students make it towards this process of the PVAT. And it comes out with these numbers that are really easily quantifiable and really easily crunched, and it just fits in really nicely with this whole national plan of like holding schools accountable. Well, how do you do that? Well, you just put some numbers in a thing and you put them in a database, and it tells you exactly how well the school is doing. And the push is doing more of that. Arnie Duncan, when he came to speak at Teachers College, the Secretary of Education, said that he wants to grade schools of education based on the test scores of the students of their graduates, right? So I mean, it's going to levels that I think a few years ago were almost unimaginable. And right now in New York City, there's a bunch of high schools that are going to be shut down this year because of test scores and things. And I think that the consortium is sort of like a big resistance to this, but it's also very, it's still in this sort of phase of like developing it to a point of maybe getting legitimacy for itself, and hopefully at some point it'll see itself as a real tool to like show that this is really the kind of thing that all schools should be considering doing, and then it's going to take a lot of money to make it happen, but if we value education, like this is what has to happen.
So I think the thing that struck me the most when Steph and I were at a conference in New Orleans is a comment that was made, kind of funny comment that was made about the achievement gap, that it kind of assumes that middle class or suburban like white students have their test scores and they're sort of like waiting somewhere for minority students to like get like enough test prep so that their scores can like kind of like meet here, and like there's no sort of like movement and white achievement, and there's just sort of like a waiting for enough test prep to happen so that there can be some sort of equal level of education. And I just think that idea is kind of ridiculous. And again, I don't think that test prep or taking a history Regents or English Regents makes you sort of like think like a historian, or taking a science, filling out some multiple choice, couple of short answers on a living environment Regents makes you think like a scientist. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is make students feel like they could, if they wanted to, acquire the skills to be a scientist or a historian or a writer. And that to me is incredibly more important than, I can practice a test so that my scores go up a certain amount. I don't think that like any gap will ever sort of like decrease in that way. And I think that, again, I don't know if I've been alive when we've like as a nation addressed any other inequities besides like a supposed test score disparity.
So work into not just like preparing kids to be scientists or historians or to be college students, but to be like engaged citizens. And I mean, I think that's like this whole purpose of public education, that going back to the origins of it was very much out there, but has been lost. And I don't see my role as a teacher as just like plugging kids into the economy, being able to be productive workers in our economy, but to be able to be critical thinkers and to have a voice and know how to make that voice be heard in a democracy. And I think that that's something that through the structures of our school is important, and also the content choices that we make and the type of stuff that we do. Is that I think that no matter what sort of economic profession a kid pursues when they leave here, it's very important to me, and I think to other people here, that they leave here also knowing that how to get access to information, how to be critical about the information that they're getting, analyze the sources of information, and look at things from multiple perspectives, and understanding the pathways that there are to make change in their society And I think that that's been lost in a lot of public schools, and being able to have performance-based assessment frees us up to be able to spend a lot of energy in that thing as well.
I also think that, like, in terms of like preparing students to like go into the world, like we prepare them when they do get a job, like they know how to write, so that like the emails aren't like miscalculated. I think one of like in today's world, like that's so heavy on like textual exchanges that especially kids of color, they can be seen as like, oh, another kid who can't write, when there's a simple typo in an email. Like we teach them the need for like revision and the need for being able to polish a piece of work before you send it off to people. We also teach them to speak eloquently on topics that the average person may or may not be familiar with, and we also teach them to think on their feet. Like part of this is not only the writing aspect, but also the presentation aspect of it. Students have to present a math problem. Students have to present their experiment. And they sit there and they talk about, like I had students talking about feminism and like the need for feminism, and how basic acts of everyday life can be considered feminist if you do it in a certain way. And that's a very advanced topic for a 16-year-old to talk about. And I think that giving them the ability and the confidence to speak in front of people that they don't know gives them an edge on students who are just prepared to like sit in their own little box of a world bubbling in answers. So students have been going to CUNY schools, and they're part of the state, and they're all about tests. So we have to have meetings with the admission directors to talk to them and show them like this is what we do, like because what they're interested in is numbers, because they don't have the resources to have like a huge admission office that goes through essays and that looks at teacher recommendations. That doesn't happen. They look at numbers, what's your GPA, what's your SAT score, what are your Regents scores, and that's not worthwhile in our opinion. And we have to have those meetings with the admission directors to say this is what they do. No, just because we're called alternative doesn't mean that it's woodshop that they're getting this math credit for. So, and that's kind of fighting against it. What we do have is the qualitative data when students come back from colleges and they're like, well, I'm bored in my freshman English class because I did all of this already. And we're like, I did my job. If you're bored in your freshman English class because you already know how to write a 5-page paper, then like pat me on my back right now, I did what I needed to do. And that's the kind of feedback that they're doing. It's like, I had a student come back and she's like, I'm reading all the books that I read with you in my freshman English seminar. And I'm like, great, and how do you feel about it? And she's like, I feel good, like I'm writing new things and I feel like I'm getting a deeper look at the books, and I've gotten B's and A's on all of my papers. Fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've definitely gotten some good anecdotal evidence from students coming back over the last couple of years, but right now it seems like the CUNY system, which is not necessarily the best next step for our kids. For one, they're not really buying into the PBATs in terms of they place kids in math and English classes based on their Regents scores in the CUNY classes, and so there's kids that aren't being accepted into four-year colleges because of these things, and that they're doing away with they've had what do they call these, like makeup classes, like remedial classes at CUNY that support kids that might arrive not ready to do certain things, and so I think we're finding that there's a lot of smaller four-year colleges that our kids fit really well into, and we're building relationships with them. And we've had a couple of kids who have gone we had a kid a couple years ago who went to school in Virginia, and now we had another student last year who went there. And it could be that these become pathways for students in schools where they think they are being valued for the skills that they've built here. I don't know that the CUNY system has caught up with them on that class in order to have. There's been, I think that document-based questions are interesting, and they're not so bad. These are things that are on the Regents. I think thematic essays also interesting. I mean, for me, my biggest beef with the Regents is this idea of a multiple choice questions. And we have to struggle with the fact that kids are going to go into college and have to take the type of test that we're not preparing them for necessarily here, and we have to walk that line a little bit. But there's for me really important political implications of resisting standardized tests, and for us in our context here, you can see that the decisions that are made about what's important to learn generally is not responsive to the needs of the kids that are in New York City public schools, and could be part of why our students traditionally do not perform as well as kids in the suburbs. It's just about they're not reflected in the content that they're expected to be learning class in order to have the reasons that I think is really problematic for my subject, especially maybe for science, in that there's 50 multiple choice questions on a global history test where somebody gets to decide what are the 50 things that you guys are supposed to know about the world and all of its recorded history. And for US history, the same thing. And generally, I feel like they make bad choices, and even though that those choices are impossible to make. So that to me just invalidates the whole idea of whether you could have a standardized test about the content of something as broad as human history, because it's very loaded in terms of the political implications of what decisions are made about what it is that you're supposed to be teaching and what it is that kids are supposed to be, and that they're.
Across the country, critics have denounced high-stakes testing, stating that it confines curricula to test content and reduces learning to rote memorization. However, the claim that more testing and rising scores indicate more learning is repeated again and again. Beginning in 2001, a study was conducted that followed graduates from progressive schools that omit standardized tests through their first few years of college. The study was led by Martha Foote, Research Director of the New York State Performance Standards Consortium, a coalition of 28 small public high schools in New York State, including LACS, that are exempt from standardized testing. These schools are based on a strong commitment to community, innovative curricula that emphasizes hands-on learning, and a focus on in-depth class discussions and project-based assignments. Even before 2001, statistics had been released indicating that consortium schools do educate and engage their students. Certain data has been released comparing the consortium schools in New York City to New York City high schools in general. For starters, consortium schools have, on average, more students from low-income households, more students receiving special education services, and a high percentage of entering 9th and 10th graders who have been scoring below average on state exams. Despite these obstacles, consortium schools have a lower dropout rate, a higher college-bound rate, and higher daily attendance. Martha Foote's 2001 study, which intended to evaluate whether the consortium system does indeed prepare students for college, tracked consortium school graduates for their first 2 years of college or university. 3/4 of the consortium schools participated. The results were impressive. According to the data sample collected, 77% of consortium school graduates attended 4-year colleges, 19% attended 2-year colleges, and 4% attended vocational or technical programs. Of the students attending 4-year colleges, 30% were enrolled in very competitive programs and 14% in extremely competitive programs. Consortium students tended to persist in college as well. Nationally, 73% of students who enter 4-year colleges return for a second year. Of the consortium school graduates enrolled in 4-year colleges, 78% return for a second year, 5% more than the national average. The average GPA after 3 semesters for consortium school alumni attending 4-year colleges was 2.7 out of 4.0, approximately a B-. It is worth noting that the ACT defines college readiness as the ability to earn at least a C, equivalent to a 2.0 GPA, in college-level courses. These results do indeed indicate that consortium schools are highly effective. They hold on to their students, teach them well, graduate them, and send them on to high education, prepared to accomplish college-level work and persist in their studies. The outcomes are particularly striking considering that, in New York City at least, these schools are serving an especially disadvantaged student population.
Obviously, standardized education has worked for quite a few. Many walk away from a Regents education with information and skills that will enrich the rest of their lives. However, this is not the case for everyone. Many talented and intelligent youth will struggle under such a system, and it is the duty of schools and the New York State Board of Education to provide them the opportunities to succeed. This is something that systems such as alternative assessment have been shown to provide and should be valued accordingly. We are Project M.O.T.O.R, and we advocate moving our teaching off of Regents.